Hello and welcome to another episode of the DigiTeacher Digest. Last week I looked at my objections to using the tertiary MOOC model for secondary schooling which goes online. Using the videoed content, the lecture online, the spot quiz which makes sure that people are watching the video, and then an assignment which is peer assessed. I don't think that model will work in a secondary school for various reasons. So is there a model which would work in the secondary sector? To my mind, it seems obvious that any pedagogical model of secondary school online teaching needs to be founded based on a solid understanding of teaching in a secondary school environment. And for that, I think we need a theoretical perspective, at least to give a language and to focus our thoughts when thinking about what should be going on in online teaching in the secondary sphere. The theoretical lens that I'd like to use is legitimation code theory. And I know that's a mouthful, and as a theory it has quite a steep learning curve, but it's the kind of theory that speaks to truisms. When you understand the basic concepts behind legitimation code theory, I think you have that sort of aha moment of, yes, that's obvious. Why did nobody say that before? The theory draws on the work of Basil Bernstein, looking at knowledge, the structure of knowledge, what makes up knowledge, and Pierre Bourdieu, looking at knowers, what makes for a legitimate knower, what are the rules of the game for being admitted into any field, any discipline. And it's pulled together by Carl Mayton and his seminal book Knowledge and Knowers. So he argues that there is always knowledge and there are always knowers. There's somebody doing the knowing and there's something to be known. And if you put it like that, that's kind of obvious. But where the strength of the theory comes from is that it gives a basic framework which allows you to look at any knowing or any knowledge in any sphere and any field. It gives a common language, a common approach and way of looking at the world. But in different spheres of life, in different fields, knowledge and knowing is not always given the same weight. So in some fields, for example, like science, having the knowledge of science is far more important than who you are as a person. You can be anybody, but if you have the knowledge, you are legitimated as a scientist. That's the code. It's a knowledge code. In order to do well in science, to be considered a scientist, you need to gain the knowledge. In other spheres, it's the knowing which is more important. The what is known is far less material. So, for example, in film criticism, it doesn't really matter what film you're looking or what particular knowledge that you are referencing. It's the approach, the dispositions, the way that you look at something. It's the knowing which is crucial, and that is considered a knower code. So you have knower codes broadly and knowledge codes. You also have relativist codes where there's nothing really particular to be known and who's doing the knowing is not important. And elite codes where both are simultaneously important. Now it's important to note that every single sphere has both of those elements. It's the relative importance given to each sphere that marks it out either as a knowledge code or a knower code. So how can this understanding help us? Well, I think once you recognize that what knowledge looks like in different contexts can be vastly different, and that sometimes you're looking to build knowing and sometimes you're looking to build knowledge, you then have a very clear understanding of what the pedagogy needs to address. The pedagogy is how you achieve that understanding in your students. Are you building knowledge at a particular time, or are you trying to build the ideal knower, someone whose dispositions and behaviors match with what you would consider the ideal knower in a sphere. I think we have to break it down a little bit further as well. As I said last week, knowledge is not discrete. It's not just a collection of facts that you can pull off a shelf and access at any one particular time. Knowledge is sequential. It's quite important the order in which you learn things, because knowledge is interrelated. One concept builds on another. There are some concepts which are foundational, and if you try and jump straight to calculus, for example, before looking at algebra, I'm not a mathematical expert, I might be getting this all wrong, but in any field, I think sequence is quite important. In other words, cumulative knowledge building is key, and we have to recognize that just posting content online is very unlikely to build that. The kind of Khan Academy model, where a student could quite jump around and choose which video they want to look at next. I know that these are often organized in programs, in a set order to build concepts one upon another. And that's absolutely great. And I'm sure this model can be made to work as long as it bears in mind that knowledge is cumulative, particularly in fields like the sciences, where knowledge is vertical. It's foundational. The goal of physics, for example, is to produce a grand theory which explains everything, to unify the fields. And then you have a grand theory of everything. In the humanities, knowledge is different. Knowledge is described as horizontal. So, in other words, you have knowledge in one particular field. I might know a lot about the Russian Revolution, and then I know a lot about the French Revolution, or I know about the English Revolution. And to an extent, I suppose I've built a little bit of vertical knowledge about revolutions in general, but each of those instances are very different and are fields of study in their own right. When you're an historian, you're an expert in the French Revolution. You're not really an expert in anything else that you haven't studied, that you haven't looked at. So the implications of this are that we need to understand that most knowledge is cumulatively built, and it's built as an interrelated structure, and the teachers are quite skilled at doing this. They have a lot of experience in, for example, teaching science, or when to sequence particular concepts, how to go about teaching science, how to go about teaching history or English or whatever it is, and how that knowledge is structured within that field, and how best to pedagogize that. And we need to build that into our pedagogical model. Just dumping content won't work. So how do we deal with the knowledge part of it, the content part of it? Perhaps it could include videos that are posted online, but how those videos are accessed and sequenced needs to be carefully thought of. We also need to think about how the ideal knower is cultivated. How do teachers cultivate the behaviors, the dispositions, the ways of thinking that they want students to reproduce? How is that built over time? And how would you do it in an online sphere? So classroom interactions, face-to-face interactions include thousands of hours of careful correction. That's not how we do things. You do it this way. Settle down and do this. Teachers very much do that through constant contact with students. If you think about tertiary English education, English literature, it's largely through the seminar rather than the lecture that knowledge is built. And that's because it's a knower code. So students will have an opportunity of trying out ideas and having them modeled by the tutor until such stage as that they are able to reproduce the same level of appreciation and to display the kinds of approaches that are valued in that field. This suggests that cultivating knowers actually takes a lot of contact time, and it takes direct contact between teacher and student. So that has to be built into the pedagogical model. So am I suggesting that in a knowledge code, like science, you could dump content online, and as long as it's carefully sequenced, that would be fine? Well, no, because there's also a Noah element to science. It may be less foregrounded, but building the ideal Noah in science is also important. And I think also because certainly high school students need a lot of mediation of content. And they need to be able to ask questions, and they need to be able to have gaps filled, which are not necessarily covered by a particular video or approach. You need contact time when teaching that content as well. Am I arguing that Noah codes need more contact time because it's a deliberate process of contact with the cultivation of an ideal Noah, which can only come through careful modeling and interaction? I'm not sure about that one. That might be the case. I'm a great believer that you need to trust teachers, and teachers will be able to build their own pedagogical models and best practice. They understand their own content knowledge best. They understand their own field best. I would not feel confident in designing an online course for mathematics because I'm not a mathematician. I would not feel confident outside of my own field. Within my own field, I have many, many years of teaching experience, and I think I understand what it is that students need. And I think I have a grasp on how to translate that into an online space. So I think the core issue of any pedagogical model for high school online instruction is really about allowing subject specialists, teachers who have a wealth of experience in a particular subject, to explore and build the models that work best. I think it's a process, in other words. I don't think we can sit down and say, here's the pedagogical model, this is what would work. What we need to do is undertake a process of getting teachers to engage with online spaces, and that's already started during COVID. So I think many of us have quite a lot of understanding about how to teach our subjects online, far more than we did before COVID. And allowing that process to play out. It's going to take a few years. There will be missteps, there will be some failures, but we will learn from those failures, we will learn from those missteps, and I think we'll start to develop robust pedagogical models as the process unfolds. If you've enjoyed this video and you enjoy the content on this channel, please subscribe, like the video, share it as widely as you can, and hit that notification bell to make sure you never miss another episode.